Steve Harvey asked a simple Family Feud question that should have been easy to answer. But when one contestant gave his response, the entire studio went silent, and Steve did something that had never happened in the show's 45-year history. It was Tuesday, March 14th, 2023, at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. The energy was typical for a weekday taping, pumped up, competitive, and filled with Steve's signature humor. Two families were battling it out in what seemed like a standard episode. With the Martinez family leading against the Thompson family, the studio audience was engaged. Steve was in his element, cracking jokes and delivering his famous reactions to unexpected answers. Everything was going exactly as planned until one question changed everything. The Martinez family was on the board with 2 strikes. David Martinez, a 42-year-old construction worker from Texas, stepped up to the podium for what could be the deciding moment. He looked calm, but there was something in his eyes, a heaviness that the cameras hadn't picked up yet. Steve looked at his card and smiled, thinking this would be a straightforward question. "We surveyed 100 people," Steve announced with his characteristic enthusiasm. "Top 7 answers on the board. Here's the question. Name something you would do for your child that you wouldn't do for anyone else." The studio audience chuckled, anticipating the usual answers. Give them a kidney, take a bullet for them, work 3 jobs, sacrifice everything. Steve was already preparing one of his playful reactions. David stared at the question for a long moment. His teammates were whispering encouragement from behind him, and his family members in the audience, his elderly mother, his younger sister, were cheering him on. But something was happening in David's mind that no one could see. David looked directly at Steve, then at the cameras, then back at Steve. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Stay sober." The studio fell silent. Steve's smile faded as he processed what he just heard. This wasn't a typical Family Feud answer. This was something much deeper, much more personal, and much more painful. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" Steve asked gently, stepping closer to the podium. David's voice was steady now, like he'd been waiting years to say this out loud. "Stay sober. That's what I would do for my child that I wouldn't do for anyone else. I've been an alcoholic for 15 years, Mr. Harvey. But 2 years ago, my daughter looked at me and said, 'Daddy, I'm scared of you when you smell like that.' She was 6 years old, and I haven't had a drink since that day." What the audience didn't know was that David Martinez had been fighting a battle that had nearly destroyed everything he loved. For 15 years, alcohol had controlled his life. He'd lost jobs, relationships, and nearly lost his marriage. His wife had left him twice. The second time, she took their daughter with her and told him he'd never see her again unless he got help. David had tried to quit before, dozens of times, but he'd always gone back, until that moment when his daughter, little Sophia, backed away from him because she was scared. That night, David checked himself into rehab. He spent 90 days there, missing Sophia's 7th birthday, missing Christmas, missing everything. But he stayed, and when he got out, he joined AA, got a sponsor, and started rebuilding his life one day at a time. Coming to Family Feud had been his wife's idea. "You need to remember that you're more than your addiction," she'd said. "You're a father, a husband, a person who deserves to have fun." The contestant application had asked for interesting facts, but David hadn't mentioned the darkest chapter. Now, standing on national television, the question had triggered something he hadn't expected to share. Steve Harvey had been in entertainment long enough to recognize when someone was sharing more than just a game show answer. The way David had said those words, the raw honesty in his voice, the courage it took to admit this on national TV, this wasn't about winning a game. "David," Steve said, his voice gentle but serious, "that's not really a Family Feud answer, is it?" David shook his head. "No, sir, it's not. But it's the truth." "Don't apologize for truth," Steve said firmly. "Don't you ever apologize for telling your truth." Steve Harvey looked at the production team, then at the cameras, then back at David. In that moment, he made a choice that went against every television protocol. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced to the studio audience, "we're going to take a break from the game for a minute because sometimes something more important than Family Feud is happening right here on this stage." The audience was confused, but respectful. The production team looked panicked. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't how the show worked. But Steve's authority on his own show was absolute. Steve walked around the podium and stood directly in front of David. "Talk to me," he said simply. "What's really going on?" David took a deep breath. In front of 200 studio audience members and millions of eventual viewers, he told his story. "I started drinking when I was 19, David said. At first it was just weekends, just fun. But then it became every day. Then it became the only way I could sleep, the only way I could deal with stress, the only way I could exist. I lost jobs. I lost friends. I almost lost my wife and daughter." The studio was dead silent except for David's voice. "2 years ago, I was at my lowest," David continued. "I was drunk in the middle of the day, and my daughter came home from school early. She saw me passed out on the couch, and when I woke up and tried to hug her, she pulled away. She said, 'Daddy, I'm scared of you when you smell like that.' She was 6 years old, Mr. Harvey. 6. And she was scared of her own father." Steve felt his own eyes filling with tears. In 30 years of television, he'd never heard anything so raw and honest. "What did you do?" Steve asked. "I called my wife, who was at work. I told her I needed help. That night, I checked into rehab. I've been sober for 742 days. I go to AA meetings 3 times a week. I have a sponsor I call every day. And I wake up every single morning, and I choose my daughter over the bottle." Steve Harvey did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He pulled David into a hug right there at the podium, in front of all the cameras, in the middle of a game show. "David," Steve said, his voice carrying clearly through his microphone, "you are one of the bravest men I have ever met on this stage." David looked up at him, confused. "I don't feel brave. I feel like I wasted 15 years. "Brother," Steve said, "you just told a room full of strangers and millions of people watching at home that you're a recovering alcoholic. You stood here on national television and admitted the thing most people spend their whole lives hiding. That's not weakness, that's courage." The studio audience began to applaud, but it wasn't the usual game show applause. It was respectful, emotional, supportive applause. People were wiping their eyes, nodding in understanding, and some were standing up. Steve turned to address the audience directly. "How many of y'all know someone who struggled with addiction?" he asked. "How many of you have watched someone you love fight this battle?" Nearly every hand in the studio went up. "That's what I thought," Steve said. "David, you're not alone in this. Not even close." Steve looked at the production team and made another unprecedented decision. "We're not going to finish this game the regular way," he announced, because David just won something more important than money. He won the Courage Award. Steve turned back to David. "I want you to know something. You came here thinking you were just playing a game, but you just did something that's going to save lives. Because when this airs, every father, every mother, every person who's struggling with addiction is going to see you standing here being brave enough to tell the truth. And some of them are going to realize they can get help too." Steve paused, gathering his thoughts. "David, I've known people who struggled with addiction. Some of them made it, some of them didn't. The ones who made it all had one thing in common. They found a reason to fight. You found yours. Your daughter is the luckiest little girl in the world because her daddy chose her." Steve reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal business card. "I'm going to give you my assistant's number," he said. "I want you to call her this week. We're going to connect you with resources, support groups, maybe even help you share your story with other people who need to hear it, because nobody should have to fight this battle alone." David broke down crying, his shoulders shaking. "Why?" he asked through tears. "Why would you do this for me?" Steve's answer became one of the most quoted responses in television history. "Because addiction doesn't discriminate, and recovery shouldn't either. Because your daughter deserves to grow up with her daddy. And because if sharing your story saves even one person's life, then this moment right here mattered more than any game show ever could." Steve turned to David's family members in the audience. His wife Maria, his mother, his sister. "Come on up here," Steve called to them. David needs to know he's got an army behind him. As David's family joined him on stage, something beautiful happened. The other contestant family, the Thompson family, also came over. Soon, both families, Steve, and even some audience members were gathered around David in what became an impromptu circle of support. When Steve finally returned to the actual game, the energy had completely shifted. This was no longer about winning or losing. It was about humanity. Steve made an executive decision that the producers later called pure television magic. "You know what?" Steve announced. "Both families are winners today." David reminded us what real courage looks like, and everybody else showed us what real support looks like. Both families received the maximum prize money, but more importantly, they received something you can't put a price on: the knowledge that vulnerability is strength. When the episode aired 6 weeks later, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The clip of David's answer and Steve's response was shared over 80 million times in the first 72 hours. But the real magic happened in the comments and messages that flooded in. "I'm 12 years sober, and David's story reminded me why I keep going. I just called my dad and told him I'm ready for help. Thank you, David. Steve Harvey showed me that real leadership means stopping everything to help one person." 3 months after the episode aired, David Martinez appeared on Steve Harvey's morning show with an update that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "The support has been unbelievable," David told Steve. "I've received thousands of messages from people in recovery, from families affected by addiction, from people who said my story gave them hope." David paused, his voice cracking with emotion. "But the best part? My daughter Sophia told me she's not scared anymore. She said, 'Daddy, you are my hero because you chose me.' That's all I ever wanted." Steve Harvey used David's story as the inspiration for the Recovery Heroes Initiative, an organization dedicated to supporting families affected by addiction and connecting them with resources for recovery. The initiative's motto, taken from David's answer, is "Choose them every day." To date, the initiative has helped over 5,000 families access treatment, counseling, and support groups. David's moment on Family Feud proved that sometimes the most powerful television happens when you stop performing and start being honest. Steve Harvey's response showed that having a platform means having a responsibility, not just to entertain, but to help when help is needed. "That day taught me that Family Feud isn't just about competition," Steve said in a later interview. "It's about connection, real human connection." David's story inspired countless other moments of honesty on Family Feud. Contestants began sharing more personal struggles, and Steve began responding with more genuine compassion. David's daughter Sophia, now 9 years old, appeared on a special Family Feud episode dedicated to families who had overcome hardship. When asked what she learned from her father's experience, Sophia gave an answer that made Steve cry all over again. "I learned that everyone makes mistakes, but brave people fix them. My daddy is the bravest person I know." David Martinez's moment on Family Feud reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help. His honesty didn't just win a game show, it started a conversation that saved lives. Steve Harvey's response proved that compassion doesn't require preparation. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is acknowledge someone's struggle and remind them they're not alone. Today, David Martinez is thriving. He's been sober for over 3 years. He works as a peer counselor, helping other people in recovery. His marriage is stronger than ever. And most importantly, his daughter isn't scared anymore. The video of David's answer and Steve's response has been viewed over 150 million times across all platforms. But the real victory isn't in the view count. It's in the thousands of people who said David's courage inspired them to get help. Steve Harvey asked a simple question about what you'd do for your child, and David Martinez gave an answer that revealed the deepest truth about love, that sometimes it's not about being perfect, it's about choosing to be better. His answer reminded all of us that behind every person standing on a game show stage, there might be a story of incredible courage that we never see. And sometimes, if we're paying attention, we get the privilege of witnessing that courage and responding with the compassion it deserves. David Martinez went on Family Feud to win some money for his family. Instead, he won something much more valuable: the knowledge that his struggle mattered, his honesty helped others, and his decision to choose sobriety was changing the world. Steve Harvey thought he was just hosting a game show. Instead, he proved that the most important moments in life happen when we choose humanity over entertainment. If this incredible story of courage and redemption moved you, make sure you subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who might be struggling and needs to know that recovery is possible. Have you or someone you love overcome addiction? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the power of honesty and human connection